Now, I wanted to talk about something real quick because I mentioned it in my last video, and if you check it out, then you might pick up on it or whatever. But I wanted to kind of go in depth in what I meant when I said like the more so me bringing up the ramifications of live action anime, and then in general what the effect would be for, let's say, the live action One Piece that's coming out, and that actually being received well, despite the fact that if you are a fan of the source material, you will generally find a lot of problems with it, especially when it comes to representing character, continuity, and just overall storytelling. Um, and when I mean ramifications, it's more so just the trickle effect of how Hollywood takes popular concepts, IPs, what have you, and then decide to bring them into a live action format. Now, I'm crazy enough, Hollywood isn't new to doing this because of the fact that, for years they've been making book adaptations, and that's been doing fantastic well. Hell, Blazing Saddles, which is one of my favorites of movies that I enjoy watching, is based on a book, but the book is nothing like what Blazing Saddles is. But that's just that's just how Hollywood is. They'll buy up a book rights and then they'll make whatever the fuck they want. Now, the issue when it comes to things like anime and for that matter, comic books, you have something that is generally a visual media. Comic books and anime have things that you can look at that shows you exactly where something should go, what the camera should look like, what the character should look like, how they should act, how they should respond, the emotions that should be given, considering certain situations and everything like that. It's literally a storyboard that's just not put into motion. And upon the idea of adaptations, should have came with the concept of essentially animating those storyboards. Ironically enough, there are a few DC movies, the animated movies, that generally do that. Whereas, like, yeah, you're actually following the story that's an iconic comic book run, and you're giving it to us in a movie, and sometimes it does well. The Dark Knight Part 1 and 2, and damn, there's the Killing Joke. But the first 30 minutes of the Killing Joke, ooh, is all original, and you could tell, and it's so stupid. But I digress. It's something to where it's like it makes no sense considering all the content that they have at their disposal that they wouldn't constantly produce and release content like that, especially considering what the brand has been going through. And it's like, why haven't you started with some of your more popular comic book runs that kind of revitalize characters, change the outlook of certain people within the series and whatnot, or the overall aesthetic of a character and whatnot, whether it be the death of a character, of a beloved character or whatever, and just do that rather than have a Death of Superman book that doesn't really play out like how the Death of Superman actual book does. well, you have a Death of Superman movie that doesn't play out like the Death of Superman book. Sorry, misspoke. But going back into anime, it's like, well, since comic books have basically been just screwed to all high heavens, whether you blame DC or Marvel for that, and you definitely should, because it is their fault. It's something to where generally they went to something that was popular. They had a good slew of money making ideas by incorporating something. They found their niche and then they ran with it and they made them billions. And you can't take that away from them. But the problem still lies in the fact that they've never went back to the source material and incorporated or brought in or justified any of the stuff that's done within the source material that made people love those series so damn much in order to facilitate, well, I say in order. Again, I misspoke. They never went back and justified any of the stuff that was done within the comic books that made these characters so beloved. Uh, and brought that to the cinema, which then essentially would have made it to where, hey, maybe you would have had an actual good Thor movie rather than the first one being kind of a sleeper hit that realistically kind of went over a lot of people's heads, and more so a lot of people not even needing to look at the earlier MCU movies rather than just kind of jumping in at the first Avengers and then going from there on out. You probably saw the first Iron Man, then you saw the first Avengers, and that was it. But the first Captain America movie and the first Thor movie were movies that honestly are like, ugh. And I would argue that the first Thor movie has a hell of a lot better acting in it than I remember. And because of that, it's like, yeah, it's a far, a much better movie than I remember. But it's still just bogged down by some fluff here and there that's just kind of whatever. But for the most part, the movie is 1,000 times better than people probably give it credit for. Especially compared to like the later renditions of the Thor movies. But you see what I'm saying? Where it's like essentially they never really encumbered Thor from the comics. Now, I'm not saying that you have to do every fucking comic or start from the very beginning and lead your way up to what it is that we currently have. Also, then I would also argue, why can't you? But well, kind of your fault that you can't at that as well. Multiverse. But it's something where it's like you've had a roadmap to the success of these characters, and going based off of just movies, you've made what you've made. But in terms of general intrigue or respect and the beloved continuity that comes with these characters, the comic books still reign true as the original source material. So why deviate from that? And then, ironically enough, you have a multitude of people who essentially praise stuff simply because it happens to be the opposite of, or it happens to be different from what's originally intended with the characters. I would say, case in point, the newest Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, where a lot of people praise it simply because it happens to be different from other iterations of the Turtles, while most iterations of the Turtles actually stay true to who the characters are, which is why they're beloved, liked, and everything like that. And the newer movie generally tries to change that and deviates away from it. But the problem with that is that those things can't last, because when you change and deviate away from what a character is and what makes them special, then you're not making that character. And essentially that praise and admiration that comes from that change wears off as soon as people get tired of it, because all it is just, it's a fluff. It's like a little spark done to just wane interest. And it's like, hey, look at this. We made this little thing slightly different. Ooh, okay, yeah, now it's good. Now this is different. I like that. It's different. It's different. But then it's like, okay, what else did you change? And it's like, well, we can't really change anything else because otherwise then it won't be the character anymore. And it's like, well, how do you make this interesting? Well, I can't make it interesting based off of the changes, because what I changed was something that was kind of a one and done deal. I actually need to go back and kind of incorporate this character into turning into what it is that they're supposed to be in the beginning before I did my changes. An example of this would be the MCU Spider-Man, whom is not Spider-Man in the MCU, but literally by the end of No Way Home, they tried to make him that way. It took them 3 movies to give him the idea of with great power comes great responsibility. Tried and true phrase that Spider-Man actually lives his life by. Yet this character has been Spider-Man all this time without knowing this phrase. You see how it's a problem to where it's something that is like, regardless of how you feel, well, this existed, it's always been done this way, blah, 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 blah. What it is that you're working with is something that's beloved and special the way that it is. So changing it makes no sense. And what the fuck do I mean with all of this going into anime? I know, I'm rambling, but I'm trying to, like, I'm painting a picture so I can make a point here. And essentially with anime and manga, you're dealing with something that is a visual media, and it only has one interpretation of it. Now, despite westernized ideals when it comes to this shit, when it is in making movies and adaptations and whatnot, you have an abundance of people who believe that, hey, you know, showrunners, script writers, screenwriters, and things like that. They're they're people who associate adaptation with how do I make this comfortable to the American population? How do I make the westernized media okay with what it is that they're about to see? And with anime and manga, they completely disregard one of the key aspects that makes that interesting, which is that people like it because it's different from Western media. Anime and a cartoon are two different things. Now, technically, anime just means Japanese cartoon, but they're two different things. They're things that are incorporated. They function. They progress differently. And the backings behind the fandom, the storytelling, the writing, and all of that stuff, it's very immersive. It's very deep and it's very methodical. But it is encumbered by Eastern writing, whether it be just the philosophies, their historical aspects, their freaking mythology, whatever. They're incorporated. They incorporate that into their storytelling and into their shows. And when you try to essentially remove that aspect because you feel that for some reason the American population can't get behind it, understand it, or even function well knowing anything about it, well, then you get what 4Kids did to Pokemon for years, where a rice ball was a donut. And, a character who's clearly in Japan in a Japanese school is speaking with a Brooklyn accent. it it's something to where it's like it it is what it is. So it was like in like I guess the basic way of looking at things is just that it is what it is. So why are you changing it? It's popular for the reason that it is what you're seeing in front of you. The story that's told, the characters that are showcased, how they act, how they're portrayed, what they go through, their ups, their downs, and all of that. That's done the way that it is because that's what makes this scenario and the situation special. Now, I'm not saying that, Japan is like holier than thou when it comes to the storytelling stuff, or even when it comes to their adaptations. Trigun, for example, in the manga is different from the anime, yet, a lot of people know more about the anime than they do the manga. But as far as the Eastern media has went, manga sells anime, anime sells manga. And there are a lot of people who essentially go back and buy manga simply because their favorite anime and then like they're known or they figure out like, hey, there's actually more content or things that you probably didn't even see in the manga that you probably didn't even get showcased in the anime. And it's like, oh, interesting, cool. Hell, there have been anime that have been made strictly to only sell a manga. That series keeps going to this day and the anime only has like 12 episodes and they could be like within 12, 13 or whatever volumes worth of content. It is like they still only got that one season of an anime. That happens. But it still is something to where it's like, based on what it is that they do within the Eastern content, it still has the core concepts and the core ideas of their story, characters, elements, all that stuff. While as when it gets sent over and westernized, like when you get that main idea of let's westernize this because a modern audience in the West probably won't understand a lot of the cultural aspects that come with anime and shit like that. Once you do that, you ruin so much that is presented within the anime that generally makes it intriguing to the Western audience because of their lack of knowledge on the subject, their lack of continuity that they might have when it comes to run-on jokes that might span within different anime on over a large scale. There have been plenty of times where, I look back on like getting into anime where it's like jokes that I didn't understand the concept of became apparent later on after I got immersed into the world of anime. But I had to fill that need, fucking nosebleeds, for example. Rather than couldn't legally in Japan, I guess they couldn't show or like they weren't allowed to show boners and whatnot, even though sex appeal and sex sells and whatnot. So you couldn't have your character show a boner, which is clearly what's happening. So the joke became, hey, the blood, instead of rushing to the other part of their body, is coming out their nose. That's the joke. That's all the nosebleeds are meant to do. And it's become such a known gag that it's just seeped within that culture of anime. And then even to this day, you still see that gag. Whether or not you believe it's funny or whether or not it's played out in a way that you enjoy, that's the gag. That's what it is. But that's a part of that culture within that media. That's fine. Now, can you showcase something like this live action and it still be known or identified within Western audiences? I don't know. But who's to say that you couldn't possibly pull it off in a way to where, even though they might not understand the meaning behind a nosebleed, the joke or the iteration that you do, it still comes off comical regardless. Or have a throwaway line where someone is mentioning the history that I just gave up about it, about, oh, I guess like the blood couldn't rush to his junk, so it had to come out somewhere. Something like that, to where now people are like, oh, okay, now I get why that's happening. Ha ha ha, classic comedy. Any of these things would be an appropriate way of handling such a subject rather than just going, hey, just don't have the nosebleed. Like the character doesn't get this gaga over girls to where he has a nosebleed like that, because Western audiences can't wrap their minds around that gag because that's not something that they're used to. The problem with that, though, comes into play when that character is identified, or his core thing that he does is constantly have these nosebleeds and whatnot. A thing that people enjoy about him is the funny antics that he does in order to try and get his rocks off, which leads to him having these very powerful nosebleeds that make you laugh and whatnot. And so, while as it might be entertaining to someone who's well adversed in anime, to someone who has no idea about the culture of the joke or the concept, that might be something that goes over their head. But you, as someone who is adapting this character, do not get to go, well, I have to remove that because of the fact that it's just not going to be something that they can, that I can actually bridge together. That's a bad way of looking at it. That's a terrible way of handling adaptations. Because, again, what it is that makes this special is the difference that it has. Whether or not people are able to understand the elements that are in there, the wink wink nudge nudge kind of jokes and whatnot, that's not for you to discern. That's just that's what the product is. That's what it has. That's laid bare in front of you. That's it. And so if the audience is essentially confused over some elements, or you feel that you're probably wasting too much time explaining everything or doing stuff like that, then it's like, it's fine to tweak it, change it, add some dialogue, give some context and stuff like that. Anything, which would probably help out your product a lot. And, you go from there. But to straight out change it is destroying it in any way, shape, or form. Now, Jesus Christ, when I mention this in terms of like bringing up and talking about like the ramifications of it, now, of like, transitioning anime and things like that, going into the realm of saying like the ramifications of all that, and it's like, well, when you get to that point of changing it and everything like that, now you have an abundance of people that would essentially, if it does well, which so far it has never done when it comes to a westernized adaptation of an anime, except for Battle Angel Alita. When you get to that realm, what's going to happen is that, much like with the comic book movies, you're going to have an overabundance of people who essentially are looking at this media in terms of making a profit that do not share the passion behind it. And then you might incorporate, or what you might get is essentially what currently the MCU has, which is an abundance of people who are writing for said product who actually openly deny it or they disavow it. Similar to what happened with The Witcher. You have a slew of people who are looking at this product and they're criticizing it and defaming it. They're not liking what's going on. They're not sitting there going, hey, this is a plot hole, let's fix this. Or maybe this moment should have had a character die. This is something that fans actually always believed, and then the writer just kind of has them go off into the distance and nothing happens. But maybe we can actually have them have a noble death with the situation. These things would actually incorporate well with like an adaptation. Similar to I believe on The Witcher when Roach died. That's something that doesn't happen, but the performance was something that a lot of people praised because it was very well acted and good scene. But you see what I mean, where it's like you have a huge example of movies, TV shows, cartoons that have come out based upon comic book characters that essentially just shit on the very idea of liking that character. Hell, there's shows that openly mock the character that it is that you're watching, which makes it to the point where you don't even want to look at it anymore. And you can sit there and fluff and change the numbers all you want without trying to put any basis behind stuff when it's like, well, why did the Ultimate Spider-Man series run almost as like way longer than Spectacular Spider-Man and any other Spider-Man that came before it? Well, couldn't you also talk about the fact that Disney just had cash to burn, and much like with a lot of the movies that came out on the MCU banner, they were just throwing cash at stuff, and they didn't care what the comeback was. They just threw it. They was letting it burn. They didn't give a damn. And regardless of the numbers or actual viewership ratios and whatnot, they still just kept throwing that money at it. And they openly canceled other products that they had, much like Spectacular Spider-Man and whatnot, who actually were built up on the merits of following and portraying a character in a way that was actually justified and beloved by the fans. The hell, to this day, I still hear people when discussing Spider-Man cartoons talk about Spectacular Spider-Man as if it's the best Spider-Man cartoon, and I'm inclined to agree with them. That it's basically my favorite. But it's something bad when I hear in terms of ramifications in having it to where it's like you have people who are looking at characters, looking at concepts from anime, and then associating or judging them based off of Western ideals and merits and concepts. The reason I go so big on One Piece, with the live action coming out from Netflix, is the fact that, well, One Piece is currently the biggest anime in the world right now. It's the biggest. It's big. Big. It's the biggest. But even though it's the biggest anime in the world right now, you literally have a showrunner who, upon promoting for the series and promoting for the live action that he's doing, was expressing such passion behind his love for One Piece, his dedication towards making sure that he could get this done, the fact that it was something that was being done and he wanted to front run it and everything like that. Even how much he enjoys the characters, or his favorite character being or like a character that he really likes, Sanji. But then you hear in them talk about the fact that, well, they feel that the character of Sanji is problematic for today's audience. So they change him a bit. They tweak the aspects of his character that are still currently being used today within the anime that is still going on and being shown to a modern audience. And in order to facilitate some need that they have, that this character would be better suited this way. Because otherwise, how could the West understand him? When the West, who look at One Piece, understand him perfectly. They like him. You were able to understand him perfectly. It doesn't seem to make sense that essentially you remove the idea of adaptation and then you try to convert it into interpretation. And it's like, this is a better way of how this character should be. This is what I think this character should have been doing. This is what I wanted these characters to say, or how I wanted them to act. That is what we call fan fictions. And those have their own place in the dark corners of the internet, and they need to stay in the dark corners of the internet. But you are adapting something. And to confuse the notion of an adaptation with like a, a one-to-one reenactment or anything like that. And it's like you're pettifogging. And it's like you're trying to make up for the mistakes that you were making simply because you're making them. you knew what you were doing when you were doing it. You just hope no one would notice that you were able to, bam, make your money and then move on to the next thing. And that's the problem. That's the issue that's going to come with this. I was speaking with a friend of mine who essentially doesn't even really care for One Piece, but I was telling him, I was like, the fact that this is being done and it being such a big deal, the wave that could come after this, with a lot of people trying to jump on the bandwagon of getting animes turned into live action, it it can stem to eventually it affecting Dragon Ball Z all over again. And it's like we seen what happened when someone tried to incorporate Dragon Ball and turn that into a live action movie. And that's the ultimate example of essentially just fucking up on every level available. That's the ultimate example of that. So who's to say that essentially if you have it to where someone does One Piece with this abysmal uh abysmal attempt at trying to adapt this series into something that is worthwhile of watching in live action, that it won't happen to things that you actually hold dear and you feel that are beloved. It's the same mindset that plagued the comic book fans when it came to comic book movies. It's the same thing, because they sat back and it was like, well, I don't really know this character, so whatever. But people who enjoyed the character were screaming to the high heavens, like, hey, they're not showing this, they're doing that, and it's not good, it's not good. Then the movie came out and it was just whatever. And so then they moved on, but that movie was whatever, but it made some type of money. But looking at it from someone who comes from a fandom aspect, it's like, you could have made more. Why are you changing what it is that's core and integral to the character, when that's stuff that people love about said character? Why is that your immediate outlook towards things? It's like, well, the character is about this. Let's change that. But that's not who the character is. But that's the immediate response when it comes to these adaptations. When it comes to these things that they're bringing into the big screen and they're adding live actors to play these characters that literally can be moved any way, shape, or form. I don't believe that there's no way you can do a live action adaptation of every anime or any anime. I don't believe that. That's a fallacy. You can't. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is just that you're not actually holding that series or that concept with any integrity. You're not doing this from the perspective of a fan. You're doing this from the perspective of a bunch of stuffed shirt executives who are sitting there going, what is it that people want to see? What is it that they want to like? And they're piecing this together like they would any crapshoot of a movie that they just pump out year after year after year. When you actually have content that has history, that has fans, that has characters and concepts that have been built up over years. And all you have to do is take that fucking storyboard, because it's a visual media, and then just transfer it over into the big screen. That's it, to the live action. To get your actors in these positions, to get shots that are similar to what it is that the manga can do. To have the effects capable of doing what these characters are capable of doing, but still transitioning and showcasing the story the way that it should be done, because that's what drew you to this in the first place. That's why this is so beloved in the first place. You're not adapting when you decide to change things in accordance to how you think it should be. It's not an adaptation. And it's sad that literally Battle Angel Alita is like the number one thing to look at when it comes to handling this subject matter correctly, to where the people behind it actually were passionate about getting this thing out of there, to the point of just looking at that and then looking at the OVA, you'd be like, damn, this shit is spot on. It's like, yep, yes it is. And there's nothing wrong with that. The things that you essentially would enjoy from the OVA, which obviously they did, which is why they made the live action, you got in the live action. And then again, I argue that the live action handled it better, considering that it added on, like, what is it, little battle ball action scenes and stuff like that, that actually made it even more enjoyable. So, and it had fantastic acting portraying the characters. Because anyone could do a fucking cosplay. Constantly saying, ooh, the characters look good, that's nothing. That doesn't mean anything. Anyone can cosplay. But to make sure that you're delivering what it is that essentially you promised, which is an adaptation. That's what's integral. That's what's important. That's what needs to be done. But you just have so many people that are conflating the issue or basically overlooking what it is that's going to be done when you have this one-off success of a live action adaptation done in the West that doesn't adhere to what it is that the original source material is. Because much like when it comes to the MCU and everything DC has done, you are going to get a flood of people trying to incorporate their ideology, their freaking politics, any type of dumbass concepts shoved into what it is that you care about, just so they can promote, produce, release, or say whatever they want about the subject matter that you like with whatever it is that they feel like talking about. And that's not good. That is just not good. And again, the trickle effect that this will have is like whether or not they're coming after an anime that you like now, there might pop up in them do something that you care about later. And you sit back and look at it and it's like, this could have been handled a hell of a lot better. I know you have the means of being able to do it. I know you have the money of being able to do it. So why is it that you messed up this badly? Why were you biting off more than you can chew for something that you generally, obviously, don't understand? And so because of that, like I said, the ramifications at its core will be that you will see an abundance of live action anime that come out that ain't got shit to do with the anime that it's based off of. Because that's Hollywood. That's how Hollywood has always operated when it came to the books that they've used, but they never understood it when it came to the comic books. And rather than fixing the bad comic book movies that we have now, they're immediately shuffling on over to anime, which is something that's even a bigger obstacle. Because if you can't understand your own shit, how the fuck you think you gonna handle someone else's? And that's the lesson for today. All right, that's it. This has been another episode of Fun with Flame. I've been your host, Daniel the Flame. As always, good people. Hope you have fun.